To illustrate a point I want to make, let me tell you a story about what happened about a year ago. Protection of public lands in the United States is a complicated equation, just as it is in your countries. The U.S. National Park Service is organized in the Department of Interior, an agency that has a responsibility for the protection and preservation of our natural and cultural resources, and also the development and use of energy resources on public lands. One of the goals of the Obama administration is to reduce the U.S. dependence on foreign oil. And to illustrate the balance of the values and conflict within the Department of Interior, Secretary Salazar, in one of his first decisions, canceled the sale of 77 oil and gas leases because of concern about how they were leased and the potential to impact on nearby national parks. This move was so controversial by some of our government officials that it held up the confirmation of many presidential appointments within the department. About 3 months into the administration, Secretary Salazar called a meeting of his leadership. He called together the deputy secretaries, assistant secretaries, deputy assistant secretaries, science advisors, bureau directors, the political leaders, and the senior career officials, where he brought us together at his conference table and he challenged us. And he said, basically, the president has committed to a major reduction in our dependence on foreign oil and the development of renewable energy. That responsibility falls on the shoulders of the Department of Interior. And he wanted to know what each of us were going to do to meet the president's promise to the American public. I was in the room, sitting about 3 seats to the left of the secretary, and it was in a U shape. And fortunately, he started at the other end of the U. But he was getting some great answers. Fish and Wildlife Service was saying that they were going to accelerate the consultation process on endangered species so that projects could move forward where appropriate. The Bureau of Land Management was going to accelerate its permitting process for solar and wind energy projects. The Bureau of Reclamation was going to look at a new way to operate dams so that the reservoirs could be used as batteries for the development of solar power and wind power. And he kept coming up the U shape, and he passed himself, and he came to me and he looked at me and says, Dan, we're going to save you for last, which was another great thing because I hadn't figured out what I was going to say yet. And he went around the table, and then he came back to me. So after 34 people approximately had talked about what they were going to do to help develop these resources, he turned to me with a simple question. So what is the National Park Service going to do to reduce America's reliance on foreign oil and to develop those renewable energy projects? Well, it was a good thing I had the time, but I did have an answer, and it was quite simple. I said, Mr. Secretary, these conversations often make the National Park Service very uncomfortable. We're often at odds with the other bureaus in the room, energy developers, state governments, private citizens concerned about jobs that energy development may bring. Our job is to preserve and protect our resources unimpaired. But we have something that nobody else in this room has. We have 285 million visitors and the capacity to educate Americans on climate change, energy conservation, sustainability. We can make sure Americans care and demonstrate through our actions what they can do in their lives to reduce their carbon footprint. Fortunately, he liked the answer, and we have a seat at the table. As we collect and analyze data, learn, and work our way through management decisions that will support ecosystem integrity and the resilience of species and allow us to be flexible in our responses, we cannot ignore one of the biggest challenges of all, that is explaining what we're doing and why, in a way that our fellow citizens not only understand but support. And here's the rub. A poll recently released in the US found that of those surveyed, 35% said the effects of global warming would be felt in the future generations or never. 48% said the seriousness of global warming is exaggerated, and 67% said global warming was not a serious threat to them or their way of life in their lifetime. That came on the heels of an earlier poll that asked, how much do you trust the things that scientists say about the environment? 40% of those surveyed said a little or not at all. My friends, we know that climate change is real. We see it in our parks, our refuges, our forests, and other protected areas. But in my country, many of the people I work for, the American citizens, aren't so sure that it's real. And 4 out of 10 Americans are not convinced they can trust scientists. So the National Park Service is tackling not only challenges of climate change, but the challenge of explaining climate change. With 285 million visitors each year, we believe that our 392 national parks must be effective models of sustainability, invisible platforms to communicate the realities of climate change. By choice and circumstance, we can be bellwethers of public understanding of climate change and its impacts not only on park resources, but the world at large. We are place-based. People come to us year after year, generation after generation. 60% of our visitors are repeat visitors. They know when something is different. They see the effects of climate change, the glacier that is receding or the coral that is dying, and ask why, and what are we doing about it? And then they often ask how they can help. These visitors are connected with the health of our parks. The first-time or casual visitor, we need to seize teachable moments and translate what can be dry, obtuse science about something that seems so distant, the climate, into bite-sized nuggets of useful information. That is the value to the visitor. Because the demands of today's world are never-ending, whether it's a job, school, or family responsibilities, people are too busy to focus on things that don't matter to them, at least don't matter to them today. But when they come to a park for an hour, or for an afternoon, or a week, we have their attention. We can give them hiking. We can give them the hiking or history experience that they came for with a side order of climate change. Show them the impacts that we see, explain the science that we know, demonstrate what we're doing about it, and offer them ways to help. Here's some of the ways that we're tackling this issue. Our ranger-led programs and interpretive exhibits are addressing climate change, allowing visitors to see for themselves what is happening, and to understand what the science is telling us is still to come. Energy use in the National Park is the National Park Service's second largest, after vehicles, source of greenhouse gas emissions, a leading contributor to climate change. We are conducting energy audits at 55 of our biggest energy-consuming parks, and we use the results to drive climate action plans for all parks with the goal of slashing our carbon footprint in half. Many of our larger parks are asking, and in some cases requiring, visitors to park their cars and to get on fuel-efficient buses. We explain how the bus helps the park lower its carbon footprint, giving visitors an insight into our thinking while letting them concentrate on the park, not the traffic. We are requiring all major park buildings to be built to LEED standards, so the materials are sustainable, the energy sources alternative, the lighting systems efficient, the toilets low flow, and the light bulbs fluorescent. At the new certified LEED Platinum Eielson Visitor Center and Denali National Park, the low-profile earth berm building not only blends into the landscape, but uses renewable energy sources for 82% of its energy needs. Visitors are able to learn almost as much about our solar panels and recycled flooring as they do about Mount McKinley. Our website shares our science, our thinking, and a Do Your Part program that offers ways for people to reduce their carbon footprint at home and in their communities. America's national parks are telling a compelling story about climate change, and in telling that story, they are making climate change real, connecting the health of the park to the lives of our visitors, helping them make the right choices for our planet. Consider these facts. Well, now I'd like to turn to childhood obesity. Consider these facts. Childhood obesity threatens 1/3 of the Americans' children. We spend $150 billion every year to treat obesity-related conditions, and that number is growing. Obesity rates have tripled in the past 30 years, and for the first time in history, American children may face a shorter expected lifespan than their parents. Kids 8 to 18 years old spend an average of 7.5 hours daily watching TV, on a computer, playing video games, or using other electronic media. 1/3 of high school students get the recommended level of physical activity. Overweight kids miss school 4 times as much as normal weight kids. Low-income and minority children are most seriously at risk. Overweight kids are more likely to become overweight adults. Poor nutrition is everywhere. Only 2% of school-age children consistently eat well. Childhood obesity is a national epidemic. It affects not only the health of America's kids, but the health of our nation. And it's all preventable.